Hello and welcome to Linden New Art's series of Meet the Artist sessions. I'm Juliette Hanson, the curator at Linden New Art. Our Meet the Artist series introduces our audiences to current exhibiting artists at Linden, and tonight we're going to be talking to Ruth Höflich. You're joining us live on Facebook and YouTube, and there'll be lots of opportunities to ask questions. So if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment about the conversation, please use the chat or Q&A sections. Our Events and Community Engagement Coordinator, Linda Studina, will be monitoring the chat, and she'll pass on any questions that you add in there. Before we get started, let me begin with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we all virtually meet this evening. Tonight, I'm joining you from the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and Ruth is joining us from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And while we meet virtually this evening, tonight draws upon the ancient history of this land and reflects the millennia of experiences of First Nations people coming together to celebrate, to learn, and to connect. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all First Nations people joining us this evening. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Ruth Höflich. Ruth Höflich is an artist and filmmaker, born in Munich, Germany, and currently based in Melbourne. Ruth's work has been shown internationally in Munich, London, Glasgow, Lubov, New York, and at Rotterdam International Film Festival, amongst others. She's been an artist in residence at the Griesdale Arts in the UK, the Banff Centre in Canada, and Maracuya in Tijuana. In 2016, Ruth received the Emerging Artist Prize from the City of Munich, and Ruth is also one part of Halpert Höflich, a collaborative duo engaged with artists publishing and performance. She holds a Master of Fine Art from Bard College, New York, and BA from the Slade in London. Welcome, Ruth, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks so much, Juliette. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, we're going to begin by looking at some of your past projects. This will give us some context for the current show that you have at Linden. I have some images that I'm going to start sharing, and maybe as I move through them, you can tell us a little bit more about these past projects. Okay.
Yes.
Bring up some images. Here we are.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this first one started in 2016.
That's
Is
right.
that right?
It's a project I often like to start with because it's set in it's also like a multi disciplinary project that involves video and photography and print or publication. And it's set around a print shop, and that was sort of a context that I grew up in. And it's sort of the kind of the beginning of how my relationship with art making. And so it's a good introduction, I think, to where things started for me. And the way this was set up is that the monitors kind of imitate the circulation and feeding of the machinery in a print shop, so like a copy machine or other kind of printing devices, and creates this sort of rhythm that pushes back and forth between these different monitors and surfaces in the space. And that's sort of a technique that I've been using since. So, and in this particular project, so this is a poster that was related to it, and as well is kind of ongoing in the sense that it's been reiterated a few times, and the video changes slightly every time it's shown. So it has this sort of idea of continuing and stretching out over time. That's another. Sorry.
Yeah. So, and what's the sound aspect? What do people hear?
It's a diegetic sound of the workshop, and so the machine sounds, and this kind of in a sort of rhythmic collage of the diegetic sound, and then there's also a sort of muted piano sound underneath, because in that particular environment they're producing classical music scores, so it was kind of a nod to what was being made while I was filming in there.
How
and
interesting.
the imagery. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all.
It kind of focuses on these sort of the debris that happens in the process, so things falling to the floor, pieces of paper that are cut off, and they kind of lie around but form these sort of patterns and formations that are not immediately visible when you kind of enter that environment, but can become prominent. And also this sort of idea of, I guess, changing direction, where you look at something on the floor and then the ceiling, and you're sort of trying to have a multi-directional experience of the space, things bouncing off each other, sort of organized in that way.
I was thinking how interesting it would have been for you to be editing a film that's essentially about the process of editing. So,
yeah.
It's quite layered. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Like the cutting idea of the cutting. Yeah.
And this next project's from 2017 called Still Burning. Yeah, what was this one? What was involved in the making of this one?
So that one I included next because it was sort of the first time I started using working with the body as depictions of the body in the videos. And this one is a figure that kind of moves through the course of a day, but also through different periods of life. So from childhood to adulthood and then older age, and kind of following a family lineage, but it's almost sort of the same person and finding its form in a way. And these photographs were exhibited alongside it, and also playing with this idea of layering that is in the current show. So I included those as well. This sort of moving in and out of the screen space, between the screen space and the print, was present in that work as well.
And the way the screens kind of intersect, and they're not in the most expected positions in the gallery space.
Yeah, they're kind of obstructing doorways, and there's always that sort of, I liked working with kind of against the architecture a little bit. So you're surprised to sort of where you see them. And in this work as well, you again have these sort of images pushing across several monitors that they're synced, and then sometimes it syncs into one image, but other times it travels across. It's like these sort of composite sections, and it's sort of edited with that in mind. That is that sort of different monitor situation.
It reflects this idea, I think, that comes up quite frequently in your work of kind of obscuring or revealing certain content, I suppose, as if it's moving across in that way.
Yeah, that's right. And also this one, I started working with this idea of a sort of a larger body or a second body involving the environment. And so there is this sort of relationship between the human and non-human and animal bodies and environment at large. So you see these sort of interiors of caves and a lot of seaweed and this sort of like trying to sort of think of that as one space rather than separate.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing image.
So breathing in, the moment of breathing in.
Yeah.
So these are just stills from the video.
And yeah, moving to a more recent project, I suppose, from 2019. What was the inspiration behind this one?
So this one is a collaborative project, and as you mentioned in the introduction, I also work collaboratively, and it's always been really important to me to have dialogue, as peer dialogue, as part of my practice. And this one is a weather report I was working on with my friend Heather Ann Halpert, who's based in New York. And it was a writing project and photography project that we engaged in over a year, where we were writing these daily weather reports of what we would call internal weather. So it was sort of trying to measure things that aren't necessarily measurable in a sort of normal predictive sense. So there are these diary entries, but juxtaposed next to each other from the different hemisphere and different time zones, and kind of almost like trying to find synchronicities and having sort of things in common, even though we were stretched apart in different locations. And it was sort of the year before COVID happened, and around the time of the bushfires. So there was this intense sense of a crisis happening and about to happen that kind of fed into the work as well, and how you feel that on a more intuitive or bodily level, these sorts of atmospheric changes. And so we made this book, which you can see now, a page section from that.
There does seem to be a very physical aspect to it as well, though. What was happening here? This is you, presumably.
Yeah, we did. During that process, we did do a residency together. So we did make some photographs and some video while we were there. So it also sort of feeds in and out of the book format. So we have done readings and in relation to it, and it's not, it's sort of multifaceted and still unfolding in some respect. Yeah.
And this is the most recent one that we're going to talk about, called Plant. 879 pages, 33 days, made last year. I'm interested to know more about what you were doing with this one.
Yeah, so this one was slightly kind of a departure for me, because it's a single screen work, and it's really a film work. And so I was, which may have been to do with this, the circumstances last year and having sort of the time to focus on one thing. But so it's ended up more in a film format. But the background of this work is an archive that was found in a family property that my mother found in the 80s. And as she was sort of looking through that archive, she found this file that documented a witch trial in the late 18th century.
Wow.
And so it's this sort of relationship of her to this file that she found, which I then kind of tried to unpack and relate to this idea of a family album and a personal relationship to a space, as in how you remember it growing up somewhere. but then sort of the larger history of something like a witch trial occurring before your time, and how that maybe affects the meaning of a place. Yeah. So these are stills from the film, and it's also sort of animating this idea of the album being on continuously alive, or like something like an archive not stopping, but through being reread again, it sort of opens up hidden aspects of it. And yeah.
And so there were 879 pages to the archive that was found.
This is just the file. This is just the witch trial. It was that volume. Yeah, it was a really, really big file with lots of witness accounts, and because there was an official trial, and that was kind of part of the strange thing about it, to discover the bureaucracy around the systemic kind of side to the recording of this
yes, of
historical.
And it's interesting that I suppose that scenario of a trial, particularly maybe related to witchcraft, I can see how that may be, you know, in terms of ideas, this notion of truth and representation and the way people have perceived certain situations, you know, this is all feeding into the, you know, lots of those ideas appear in the exhibition that you have at Linden at the moment. Do you think it was maybe even in the back of your mind when you were thinking about working with the Conjuring collection?
I think
related to magic or witchcraft in any way, or is it quite separate?
No, I mean, there's definitely ongoing interest that connect both of them. I think when I first started thinking about the Conjuring collection, though, was before I intensely worked with, because there was that gap with last year where the George Moore happened the year before. Like, so I was initially interested in the Alma from a kind of interest in cognition and perception, and then also, I guess, this idea of conjuring being a form of relating to this idea of poiesis, of kind of writing form and emergent properties of things. But then also it was interesting because in the State Library, the Alma collection's kind of hidden. It's not something that you can access. And even as a fellow there, you never get to see the room. So it's this sort of nested, hidden collection that, so I was interested in that as well, that it was kind of, it had this kind of aspect to it, and you had to sort of find it. You could order different books from it, but you could never physically be there. So it was sort of one of the interesting things about it, I thought.
Yes. I should probably specify for people watching that in 2019, Ruth was awarded the George Mauro Fellowship, and as part of that fellowship, she developed a new body of work that related to the concept of magic. And Ruth was drawing inspiration from the W.G. Alma Conjuring collection, which is held at the State Library of Victoria. And as Ruth, you just said, it's very unusual for people to be granted access to this unless they are actually magicians themselves. And that this collection did provide inspiration for the current exhibition that we're showing at Linden. I'm interested to know maybe what were some of the most important or interesting things that you discovered in the collection as you looked through it, because it's a large collection, there's sort of is it around 5,000 artifacts in there?
Yeah,
right?
Like I don't even really know. I mean, like I was saying, I was never actually in the collection. You kind of you get access through the catalog, and of course you have like special access, but you're not sort of shown the real scope of it. Like you'll find out more, and it's also, I mean, the large body of it is set in a particular time, I would say, but then it's still been added on to some extent, and it kind of has this crossover, or at least for me, it sort of ended up having a crossover into looking at sort of the cunning, and then how that then leads into forms of divination or kind of more knowledge, embodied knowledge practices, and sort of how that flips over into becoming something generative on rather than just an illusion practice.
And I know that part of your interest in what you found in the collection was the staging of magic tricks and this kind of performative aspect to it. I thought maybe we could start by looking at the different aspects and installations within your exhibition, and just have a think about how the idea of staging magic tricks influenced the way that you were going to present the show. I mean, the curtains, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was interested in this sort of strong theatricality of the photographs, and then how there's that sort of level of artifice and of staging that is very visible, and that you can experience the gaps of in a way, whereas today often that sort of illusion of seamlessness doesn't really allow that so much. In the digital sphere, for example, like, we know they're not necessarily real images, but there's no sort of obvious puncture to that space. So that was sort of one thing I was interested in, and then sort of playing with some of that kind of through using sort of obvious filters and gels, and sort of staging the image making in a way.
Yes, because the curtain very much reminds me of a stage performance, but I think, as we were chatting about this before, that there's no front or back to your curtain. There's no kind of obvious place where an audience would sit, and there's it's kind of quite see-through as well. So there's this sort of layering and positioning of people, and it sort of makes me think of the complexity of where their point of view is. It's not obvious where exactly you're supposed to be looking in relation to the curtain, and as you say, it intersects the room, and there's gaps, and sort of intriguing. It's very and quite immersive in terms of how you've used the space. And there's lots of photography in the exhibition, and I know that photography has been a really important medium for you in an ongoing way. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about how you've used photography in the exhibition, particularly in relation to the layering of photographs.
Yeah, there's two types of photographs, I think, in the space that are, or like, let's say three. There's these floor-based pieces that have have a stacked layer on them, which is not fixed, or the two layers and the top layer is not fixed. And then there's images that have embedded that idea of layering, and then one totally different register, which are the black and white photographs that are also not framed, and they're matte, so they're kind of have a different feel to them. But yeah, the idea is, I guess, is to read it a little bit like a pattern that bounces across the room, and you have this idea of paneling that continues in the curtain, so things kind of flip over or spill out of that one particular frame, and then find a resonance somewhere else in the room. And it's just, I think the photographs have this in themselves, this kind of two-directional idea as well, because it's sort of invited to look through them, or something coming towards you, like with a spoon or piece of cutlery, that they all kind of include this table kind of motif of consuming something. And so there's this sort of notion of something going through you or towards you, and then maybe through the wall of the building in some of them.
Very much so. Maybe it's a good point to actually talk about the title of the exhibition, To Feed Your Oracle. And as you say, there are these hints in the show of, I guess, the body or spoons, and it makes me, the idea of feeding something. But I know that there's more to it than that in relation to the Conjuring collection as well. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the title of the show and what that means.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's one reason for arriving at that title was looking at kind of other figures than the magician, and like I was mentioning before, I was sort of turning my interest a little bit more towards this idea of embodied knowledge, and so then I was looking at these oracular figures, which are often female or hybrid between human and non-human animal, and it seemed to kind of almost be a reverse position where the body holds this sort of information, or which then can play out as a riddle. So there was something I wanted to kind of, I guess, reimagine what this agency would be in this whole idea of, perception being staged and constructed, and how you enter that dialogue and could make that something that has an ownership to it. And on the other side, that kind of figure of the oracular, let's say this hybrid idea kind of plays into the movie, because there's that it's not shown, but we're talking, there's this sort of bird human figure that is talked about, and which is this sort of composite image, and then the composite idea resonates in the way the photographs are constructed, I think, as well.
Yeah.
So it has these sort of different layers to how I arrived at it. And then once I've also was working with the title, you start incorporating it, thinking about it in relation to finishing the works.
Yeah, this idea of being able to kind of magically see into the future, and that you could somehow try and do that more for yourself. I guess that's what it makes me think of, feeding your oracle, sort of having increasing insight, I don't know, into anything really, any aspect of your life.
Or what you pay attention to, I guess, what different things you can spend your time like what aspects,
what you feed. Yes, of course. It might be a good moment for us to actually have a look at the film. We have a snippet of the film. The film itself is about 18, just over 18 minutes long. So we have a sample of the film. Maybe we can watch a little bit of it, and we'll keep talking once we've viewed some of it. Yeah.
I'm not sure that I've ever known something in advance in any sort of precise way, but I think I regularly know things about people I'm close to. I woke up worrying about one of my sisters the other night, and when I called her the next day, it turned out that that she was in the middle of something really difficult. At other times I've had images that have to do with the health of my family members. I don't know why that's seems to be the thing that I have, I guess, a remote view of. I don't even know if you would call it a view. It's muddier than that.
Left hand thumb, second finger, third finger, fourth finger, fifth finger, palm of the hand, back of the hand, wrist, forearm, elbow, upper arm, shoulder, right side of the chest, waist, hip, thigh, knee, calf, ankle, heel, sole of the left foot, top of the left foot, left big toe, second toe, third toe, fourth toe, fifth toe.
I was awake, definitely.
Right hand thumb, second finger, third finger, fourth finger, fifth finger, palm of the right hand, back of the right hand, wrist, forearm, elbow, upper arm, shoulder, right side of the chest, right waist, right hip, right thigh, right knee. Right calf, right ankle, top of the right foot, right big toe, second toe, third toe, fourth toe, fifth toe.
A film, which is also called To Feed Your Oracle. I'm wondering if you might tell us a little bit more about the making of the film, because we could see there that you've worked with a group of people, so you were directing a group of people, and I mean there was a kind of a process to what they were doing. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, the original inspiration for the group shooting were some of the images from the Alma collection, like about hypnosis sessions, or in particular, and so that, and I also used some, like I showed the people I was working with, the imagery, and so there was this initial idea of somewhat restaging that archival image, but then it kind of becomes something else. But that was the initial setup. So we were sort of trying to remake photographs in some sense initially.
I see. Yes.
The other aspect is this kind of darkroom photo developing that happens as a parallel strand, which the two images that are kind of developed in the film are also in the exhibition in the other room as a photograph.
I think one of the main themes in the film, and also in the other work too, is memory, and how memory kind of plays into our or can affect our perception of things in the present moment, I suppose, but how we reflect on our memories and how images play a role in that process too. You kind of exploring these things really, really beautifully in the film, and even with the layering of the photographs as well, I think somewhat references the layering of our memories as we remember them.
Yeah. I think I like this idea of kind of thinking of photography as being a mental photography as well. And this, even though I don't think memories are actually images, we sort of tend to talk about them like images, even though they're actually more like film strips, right? But somehow when we sort of relay them to other, like we think of it as a sort of image-like thing. And I think that was interesting to me, and it's kind of given me this analogy around photography and image making and cognition, and how we're processing, and then also, or we're kind of processing things and imprinting on us, and then we're echoing them out again. So we're sort of this transmission body.
Yeah. And I loved the idea of the that came across in the film too, of this sort of collective memory or collective consciousness, and sort of touching on this idea that, if we are all perceiving the world in very different ways, then how might we better communicate with each other or express things to each other? And somehow the film managed to have a really nice sense of that communal experience.
Yeah, that was sort of one of the things I was keen to construct, in a way that there's a multiplicity of subjects that are even, like, sometimes, like, the voices change, like the voice and the associative body change around. And so in the film it's sort of there's a construction of a collective voice in that sense. But also I think I was interested in maybe this idea of communicating in other ways that aren't necessarily verbal, or that might even happen in something like a dream, where that is still shareable and meaningful in a collective context. So that's sort of speculating around this idea a little bit, the film.
Yeah. There's been a really excellent review of this show that was written for Memo. I think people are going to get a link to this maybe on the screen or in the chat. But the writer of the review, Ursula Cornelia de Liu, has suggested that, in fact, you're like the magician in this whole scenario of the exhibition, in that you're kind of creating a new version of reality, or that you can somehow, you have your own kind of visual tricks or illusions to guide viewers' eyes around the space. So Ursula also points out that your work brings this kind of magical quality to everyday objects as well. And I was interested to know if you relate to that as an artist in any way, whether you think maybe artists are a bit like magicians in some respects.
I'm interested in sort of the meaning of vision, I guess, and how, but then also how that isn't actually exclusively ocular at all. It sort of involves all senses, and sort of having a vision, what that could mean is something I think about. And then at the same time you're making visual work, so there's that. But in terms of the everyday, yeah, I mean, there's a sort of, I guess, interest in looking at very mundane things in a new way, and trying to find a new pattern or a new logic in very seemingly established things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can find magic in the everyday. I think that's a really nice idea. I wondered if, because I'm looking at the time, and I'm wondering maybe what's coming up next for you, and I wondered if magic was going to continue to appear in your work or influence your thinking, or maybe maybe share what direction you might be going in next.
I'm not working on anything new just yet. So I think this process of how perception is organized, and how we can take ownership over that and how we can expand it is something I'll continue working with for sure.
Yeah, I love that idea in your show, that we can really try and take control of what we feed, how we perceive things, how we can what we can build on in ourselves, and what we can share with other people, and this idea of magic. I'm completely fascinated by it. So thank you so much for telling us more about the exhibition. And if you haven't yet seen Ruth's show at Linden, you have some time to do so. It's continuing until the 22nd of August. And we have another Meet the Artist event coming up too. Our director, Melinda Martin, will be chatting to Natasha Bieniek about her current show, Halcyon. That's coming up on Saturday, the 19th of June. And you can go to the Linden website, lindenarts.org, to join the mailing list, to make bookings for all the current events coming up, and to also keep informed about when the gallery will be open again. We all hope that that will be very soon. Thank you again so much to Ruth Höflich. We're loving having your exhibition at Linden, and it's really been a treat to find out more about your practice and the show.
Thanks so much, Juliette.
Thank you. Thank you also to Mathieu Vandeville and Linda Studina, our vitally important hidden helpers in presenting this event tonight. And thank you everybody at home for joining us. Have a good evening.